Welcome to Broadcasting Common Ground, the Deep Foundation Institute's podcast channel. In this series, DFI's Rumble, we will be speaking with opposing industry representatives, asking hard questions and facilitating a polite argument. In this episode, Designer versus Contractor, Dan Brown will be representing designers and Martin McDermott will be representing contractors. Sponsored by ECA.
Welcome to DFI's podcast, Broadcasting Common Ground. I'm Lakhi Nagarajan, and welcome to DFI Rumble, where we ask two guests to enter the arena and go toe-to-toe on topics relevant to our industry. In this episode, Morgan NeSmith referees a discussion between Dr. Dan Brown, formerly on the faculty at Auburn University and the owner of Dan Brown and Associates, a specialty construction company firm with a focus on geotechnical and foundation engineering, and Martin McDermott, a former consulting engineer with Woodward Clyde, who has spent the past 25 years in deep foundation construction and is currently with KELLER. We have two beasts from the industry. Morgan, can you give us a hint of what is in store for us?
Thanks, Lucky. And today we're going to skip the undercard action and we're going straight to the main event with these two heavyweights. The premise we want to explore today is the perception of a potentially adversarial relationship between the geotechnical design engineer on one side, who's often working directly for the owner and tasked with representing their interests, and then the deep foundation installer, who's often subcontracted to a construction manager through a separate contract. Now, we've gone over the rules pre-bout, gentlemen, and there's really only one ground rule to remember, and that's be respectful. I'll make sure each guest has time to speak and jump in for clarifications if needed. But other than that, let's have a good, clean bout and protect yourself at all times. And when you hear the bell, let's come out swinging. Are you both ready?
Ready.
Ready.
Good. Well, like Apollo Creed said in Rocky 3, ding, ding. All right, Martin, we're going to start with you. Has it been your experience that design
Dan, are you ready to rumble, bud?
Martin, anybody that's watching this on video will see I'm a little nicked up. I had a run-in with Dr. Evil, the dermatologist, and his death freeze ray gun. But even if I'm not 100%, I'm confident I got enough to do the job today.
As what was it? I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm good once as I ever was.
And that's all that's needed.
All right. Okay, Morgan.
All right, gentlemen. Martin, I'm going to start with you. Just in general, not really any specific designers, but has it been your experience that design engineers that you've interacted with understand foundation construction in general? And can those designers adequately represent the owner's best interest with limited installation, with limited experience in the installation process?
Yeah, sure. I would say that designers really generally lack practical field experience. They just haven't had a lot of it. And seeing is believing. So when you're out on a project and you're witnessing how that work is being executed, and then you understand means and methods and a lot deeper level. I think just and that's not. I think that's just a fact, and it's the designers world is. I was part of it. It's the all bowing to the almighty billable hour, and the billable hour are usually accumulated behind the desk and not behind the back of a drill rig. So in general, I think that's I don't think it's a fault, but I just think it's reality.
Okay, I can appreciate that. Dan, on the other hand, looking at foundation contractors across the board, in your experience, do they typically have a tendency to understand the importance, especially of the design process, or do they tend to gloss over items that they deem maybe unimportant or don't understand?
So having been in consulting before moving over to the dark side, Martin, you should understand that a lot of foundation contractors pretend not to know things about engineering when they do, and they do tend to gloss over items that is unimportant to the construction if it doesn't affect them or their bottom line. So a lot of times I think there is a tendency for contractors to just say, not my problem, doesn't affect me, and move on, even though it may jeopardize the performance of the foundation installation from a performance standpoint. And so I think contractors need to be a little bit more upfront and open in communicating with the design professionals, especially since I will concede that there are a lot of consultants that have very poor experience with construction, and you may be in a specialty construction area that only comes along for them once every few years, and you're doing it every day. So,
True.
Give me a break. So, some of the guys are being taken advantage of a little bit here by specialty contractors who do this day in and day out, and a geotechnical engineer may do it only once in a rare occasion.
So sticking along with that, Dan, without getting too much into specifics, can we talk about just an example of a potential memorable, I don't necessarily want to use the word conflict, but misunderstanding perhaps, or different ways of looking at the same issue, and what was the general nature of that, and where do you feel the contractor's view of the design process contributed to that?
Well, I'll share a firsthand experience that I had when we started my little engineering company a couple of decades ago. One of our first big jobs, and I naively accepted that the contractor who was installing the foundations knew what the heck he was doing. He talked full of bluff and bluster like he did, but the first foundation that was installed on the job was, of course, the test foundation, and it was totally messed up by the installation procedure. He didn't maintain a proper head. He over excavated below the casing. We had ground subsidence all around. It was a total mess. And I learned a valuable lesson that don't believe it. don't trust. I'm going back to Ronald Reagan. He said, trust but verify, which really means don't trust and verify. Once this disaster happened, now, of course, the job is a mess, and the owners, this was a design build project, of course. So the owners, engineers, now they're scrutinizing everything. You just made a mess that you're going to have to live with, because now everyone on the other side has lost their faith and trust. So we had to have, from my company, we had to have adult supervision out there just to make sure things were getting done the way they were supposed to get done, so we wouldn't have a repeat. And we ended up having to do additional tests, et cetera. I will also say a lot of contractors have somebody at the top who talks a good talk, who knows a lot. And then you go out to the job site and the A team didn't show up. It was the F troop. If you remember that old TV show, they were, these guys out in the field didn't hear everything didn't hear everything that was said in the meeting. And they're blissfully unaware of promises that were made. So I'd say that was a memorable conflict to me, and it's affected us. That we get, in my company, we definitely get involved in reviewing the installation plan, and we require that there be some teeth in it, that they explain what they're going to do. And Martin and I worked together on a job here recently up in New York a few years ago, and we collaborated and went through that, and it worked out good. I think we didn't have any problems because everybody communicated, and there was accountability.
And recognizing that, Martin, maybe talking about that, or potentially a different example of a difference of opinion on a particular subject. Are there practical construction considerations that maybe you feel don't necessarily always get taken into account by the designers?
Yeah, and just to follow on a little bit, yeah, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, right? We're all guilty in it as contractors to some degree, and is it intent or just ignorance? That is there's a pretty big gap there. But just to speak to firsthand practical experience with a public entity, transportation entity in the Northeast. We were installing 9-foot diameter shafts. They were mono shafts. It was a big interchange upgrade. So there's large, flyover structures, active lanes of traffic, lane closures. It's really, the logistics was extremely complicated. And within this 9-foot diameter shaft, 8.5-foot diameter rock socket, 8-foot diameter cage, and then the cage. So that's your substructure. And then it came up into the column, and within that column, it was probably I think it was about a 12-foot projection with the cage. So you had quite a monster to deal with there, and you had a 3-inch tolerance in location for your shaft, which was written into the spec. But within the superstructure, they had like an inch of tolerance, 1.5 inch, I think it was, of clearance around the steel with the column. So when you position the column on top of the shaft, and if you were 2.5 inches out of location with your cage, your steel was like out of the column. And so we poured the first shaft, and every gun in the room is pointed at who. Mr. Contractor, you screwed this up. They shut the job down, and it was like I had to report to the principal's office, with the general contractor. And I mean, I literally walked into, what the formation of well, I'm not going to say what the firing squad was there. It's a circle, I'm surrounded. And you, what did you do? And I just clearly explained succinctly what my responsibility was with the shaft and the location of the substructure. And now we have this issue. The problem was, it wasn't thought through. We didn't, we had to take maybe some ownership of doing it right. But it was really, we needed to put in a larger diameter corrugated pipe. The other thing is, you're hanging a 40-ton cage, 50-ton cage. When you hold it, it lays straight. But what happens when you lower it down? It goes, it shifts. And if you don't have anything there to hold it where it needs to be, then Houston, we got a problem. So that we had to work, and nobody makes money when that happens. So ounce of prevention, pound of cure. These are a lot of things, and I could go on infinitum from each job to whatever. Another one from a design standpoint is another DOT project. It was a karst environment, had the borings, and it was drilled shafts. They weren't real huge. They were 4-foot diameter with 42-inch rock sockets. And in the issuing of the job, they would do the test boring. So they had to do a test boring at every drilled shaft, but it wasn't before the bid, right? So they go in, they do these test borings, and the criteria on the, it's a solution-prone limestone, was for 12 continuous feet, you would have 90% recovery and 40% RQD for 12 feet. If that didn't occur, continue. So these shafts were originally, say, 50 to 90 feet deep. And when they implemented that infinite loop statement, we had a parking lot full of cores. And the designer asked me, so what do you think about 238 feet? And I said, I think you're losing your mind. That is not a good solution. So, and fast forward through a lot of challenges and problems on that job, redesigned a micropile, which was a more practical solution in that case. Because I said, if we drill, it was in a pier cap, 40 shafts, they were 4-foot diameter, it was a huge bridge cap. I said, after we're done your 38-foot shaft, we're going to end up having to swallow up about 4 of the other drilled shafts that we're going to have to install. So it's not practical. Anyway,
but honing in back into something you'd mentioned, and Dan touched on it from the other side as well, that I thought was interesting, and it ties in with what I wanted to touch on as well, the ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure. From your standpoint as a contractor, giving advice to a designer, from that standpoint, what is something that in general designers could better understand that would reduce the potential for misunderstandings, let's say?
I think one of the most effective tools, and Dan and I have participated like through the ADSC, DFI, these agencies where contractors and consultants can collaborate that's the realm. And when you can do a constructability review with multiple contractors, so Martin McDermott Keller Foundation can't knock on, Pennsylvania DOT door and tell them what they should do. That's like a no-go. But the constructability reviews where you have these projects and industry, us as contractors and consultants making ourselves available to go into that forum and do a constructability review of a preliminary design. I think that is definitely an ounce of prevention that would be worth it, and has proven to be worth pounds of cure on different projects over the years.
And Dan, I want to give you an opportunity to touch on that point as well, though. From a designer standpoint, is there something, I don't want to say simple or basic, but is there something that the contractors could be better understanding that would, again, reduce the potential for misunderstandings later on? Yeah,
I'm going to first start off by agreeing with what Martin said about a constructability review, the value of that, and especially with a lot of DOTs. And I've even seen now on a lot of big projects that we work on with design build, there's a little bit more natural occurrence of that collaboration. And we've even worked on a project that was a CMGC, construction manager, general contractor, right? Where we brought during the design phase, even though this was in Minnesota DOT is designing the job in-house. We're working for them, but they bring on a contractor. They select a contractor and bring on, so the contractor has input through the job. And, on private jobs, there's no reason not to do that. DOTs are laced with bureaucracy and rules and things that make some of that difficult, as you're alluding to. But on private jobs, there's no reason not to do that and get people involved. And so with respect to the contractors, I would just say things that contractors could do better would be just think things through, be diligent. I mean, actually put some thought into the installation plan. Actually go look at the rock course. If it's a foundation's going into rock, or, just basically be diligent about doing it. I know there's a lot of economic pressure on contractors to low bid jobs, which is why, the low bid process tends to be a problem with that respect. You end up getting the contractor that's just trying to cut the most corners to give you the lowest price. So I think we need to be, when a job, a lot of jobs are routine too. So a lot of jobs are routine. You're banging H-piles down to Bedrock. Okay. It's a no-brainer kind of. But there are a lot of jobs when there's some level of complexity, then you really need to get people talking, and the contractor can have some valuable ideas that the designer doesn't think about. I know from design build world, a lot of times we'll get into looking at a job, and it's how you're going to build it is everything. It's not necessarily the foundation design that gives you the most tons of support for the least dollars. It's schedule. Schedule is maybe everything. Access, sure. What kind of equipment you need. So, there's been jobs where, say, we thought this would be maybe a good place to use a big oscillator machine. Well, if you got to build a trestle to get the oscillator machine out there, and there's only a handful of shafts, and an oscillator machine puts out humongous force. So now you got to build a pretty stout bridge just to build a few foundations. Maybe that's not the best way to go. So a lot of times the designers are a little bit, either unaware or not sufficiently aware of what's driving the job. And if there can be some communication from the contractor that way, and also an appreciation of what are the important things for the design. There are some things, that just because concrete disappeared into a hole in the ground does not mean it's okay. We've got jobs now where we do tests. So the job, Martin, you mentioned with 238 feet of limestone, obviously they didn't need to go that deep. There's ways, micropiles, maybe that's a good solution, sure. But there's ways to do things. Yeah, there's ways to do things in a more reasonable way, and do a load test and prove it. So
let me touch on something that both of you, I think, have kind of touched on, and that's in our, what I would call the traditional contract model for a project. The owner's design engineer and the owner's foundation installer are often working under two different contracts. Is that model, Dan, one of the prime drivers of conflict? Because you've alluded to this, the benefits of a team approach, but that is not the traditional approach that we take to constructing from the design phase through the construction phase of a project. So is that model inherently flawed, and as a way of that drives conflict between the two entities?
Well, maybe, but there's ways to overcome it. And I would just say, just saying, okay, do it design build, and that solves all the problem. That doesn't either, because people go into their silos just the same. Nobody wants to be blamed. As soon as there's a problem on the job, the subcontractor starts blaming the designer starts blaming the subcontractor, and the general contractor's in the middle just saying, if it's either your fault or if it's not your fault, it's your fault. And so I've seen these quickly devolve into a battle when everybody goes into their own silo. But if you just, can sit down and work as a team, I always say, when you start to encounter problems, if everybody will work together, kind of put the commercial issues aside insofar as you are able, and work together to figure out what's the best solution going forward. And you make it a small problem. Small problems are more easily resolved than big problems, because when everyone goes into their own silo, you've got a problem with the specs, and now the contractors recognizes there's a problem. The specification is inappropriate, like the first case Martin talked about. And the contractor says, I've got a get out of jail free card. Not my problem. And then people go into their own silos and start, lobbing shells across at each other, and it doesn't lend itself to getting it sorted out.
Martin, how do you feel about the current, or I guess it's not always, and you both have alluded to, we are doing more design build work in the industry. But again, looking at the traditional model of the way the contracts are generally structured from the owner down, is there an inherent flaw there, or do you agree with Dan that it can be worked, that can work?
Yeah. It's I've answered this question before this way. It's the good news and it's the bad news. The good news is it's design build. the bad news is it's design built, because now you're trying to herd everybody. And I thought it was going to be like Nirvana, and it wasn't. It was not. It was very difficult to gain consensus. This is how we're going to go. This is how we're going to do it. So yeah, it's just like us. We're humans. We're flawed. It has its flaws. But whether it's that delivery method or not, it's I think you nailed it there, Dan. It's how do you build trust, so that you're not, as one of my superintendents used to say, we're drilling a hole and he'd be like, man, what happened down there? And he said, Martin, I'm like a surgeon. I bury my mistakes, right? And I was like, that's, it's better off, if you can come clean. Hey, we're a contractor. We had a problem. The Tremie pipe humped up at the bottom. I'm the last guy in the world who wants to pour a dirty hole. And if we got a problem, then somebody needs to communicate it. My eyeballs aren't on it every time. And it's a lot easier to fix that problem in a live situation than pour and hope. Hope is not a good plan. It just really is not a good plan. So, Morgan, it's just how do we build trust within whatever team we're on? If I'm representing, Keller, we're doing a design build, and we're tasked with bringing the best, the most efficient foundation system to the owner, and getting that trust from the owner and his design team. That's kind of how we try to roll, and we just try to get early involvement. If it's, I don't know that I'm answering your question completely, but
I think so. I think both of you have essentially said that both the traditional model and some of the newer ways that we're doing things are workable, but the reality is it just comes down to some amount of communication and trust
yes.
amongst the team, regardless of how the contracts are actually structured.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good place for us to conclude with round one. It's time for us to take a break. All right, and we're back for round two. We're going to swap things up a little bit, and instead of talking about conflict directly, we're going to talk about specifications. Martin, we're going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference from a contractor's perspective on the differences between performance versus prescriptive specifications? And given your choice, which one would you rather work on as a contractor?
Oh, performance by far. When we can control the design aspect of the project and what's the right foundation solution, and demonstrate what the capability is, and design a test to, I love, it's the failure is success in that test. If you can fail and move an element and measure ultimate capacity, that to me is the beautiful irony of what we can do from a performance standpoint. And we've established the guidelines of means and methods for installation, quality of the concrete, how long does the concrete need to be of at least a 4-inch slump requirement, the steel, getting an efficient number of bars that causes the least amount of blockage of the flow of concrete. Just all those elements that's where a lot of we get tripped up. In the project that I spoke of earlier, where we had the location issue, that was a prescriptive. We did everything that the spec said and ended up wrong. And and commercially, it was really a big problem for us. But that's the issue. A dear friend of ours in the industry put it so well, John Roma, right? They're more interested in the process than the product, right? And I mean, that was like That is so true. Oh, you're in the middle of the night, you're pouring 200 cubic yards of concrete. The slump is over, or the truck's over 90 minutes, and that's 95 minutes. It's like, no, you cannot use that concrete. And it's like, listen, this is here's the test that we can demonstrate that the concrete is fine. And the prescriptive terms just handcuff you, put the cuffs on.
So Dan, from your perspective, are there times though that a prescriptive specification is more warranted?
They say they want performance specifications, but they don't do it right. Performance means, how do you know that you're going to get the performance on every shaft? So like the contractors that I've dealt with, their idea of performance specification is, okay, I'll go out and put in a load test pile, and now leave me alone. Let me do all the rest of them however I want. That's not the way it works. We don't have a way of measuring performance on every, if you're paving a road and you say you can have a performance specification based on the ride quality of the completed project. With a foundation, it's not going to get the loads on it that it's designed to have. And so how do you know that you're going to have the performance on every pile on the job if you haven't tested every pile on the job? The only way is if you test a representative number of them, and then you establish a prescriptive specification that will achieve those performance requirements. And that prescriptive, so I'm saying, okay, the contractor could have some leeway to influence the prescriptive specifications, but it's hard to measure performance on foundations. I see auger-cast contractors, and you go out and they're gonna, you're looking guilty there, Morgan. They put in a test pile, and the grout is 60% overrun, and then all the production piles, it's 10% overrun. They're pumping the crap out of that test pile because they know it's a test pile. So no, go put in a bunch of piles and I'll pick the ones we want to test. So from that, with driven piles, it's maybe a little bit more easy, but with drilled foundations, not so much. You can have a performance requirements, but then you have to establish an installation procedure, a process for acceptance. And the rock, if you're putting drill shafts into rock, the rock at one place might be different than another place. The stratigraphy changes. You might want to decide to use different tools or something. You've got to commit to something that so you could, in order to get acceptance on a performance specification, you have to come up with a process that will establish an acceptance criteria, and then you have to have a quality control plan in place that will satisfy everything, and then there has to be a quality assurance plan in place.
So that's an interesting point that you bring up, because a lot of what you've described under the prescriptive specification has to do with observation and quality control. Is either the original geotechnical design or the site characterization, which often makes foundation recommendations, or the actual prescriptive specification, should that ever include the equipment, let's say for a drill shaft or an auger pile? Should that include the power of the turntable that's driving the rotation of the tooling? Or should that be left to the contractor to some extent, given another set of prescriptive testing?
I can't say never, and I can't say always. I would say sometimes it's appropriate. If you've got a lot of experience in the area and like you're putting auger cast piles into Florida limestone or something, and you come out there with an underpowered rig, it's going to meet refusal before a more powerful rig would. So, if you're using something like that to, you're trying to get embedment into a lime rock formation or something, then, you set some parameters. Otherwise, if you've got this is a benefit of having a test pile program up front on the job. If you've got a test program, then you can you can offer some leeway and you can establish that as part of the test program. And then a contractor has input into it. So to me, where I feel sympathy for a lot of designers is that they develop recommendations and then they don't get retained on the job. I've seen some huge lawsuits and litigation problems because the guy that designed the job wasn't out there after construction started. And when a problem happened, somebody who was not involved in making the design was making decisions about what's acceptable or not acceptable. And they're just reading the specs like it's a menu and have no clue what's important, what's not important. And so
we could probably have an entire other rumble about the disconnect between being the design engineer and the quality getting the construction testing portion of the project.
I'm getting hot now, Morgan.
Yeah.
I may knock out the referee.
But Martin, I do want to ask you the same thing though, from a contractor's perspective, and you like you've alluded to, you have been a consultant before. You spent many years now as a contractor. Should there ever be specific equipment recommendations in either a prescriptive spec or going back as far as the original site characterization with their foundation recommendations?
I don't think it's a bad idea to specify a minimum rig size for the job, what the expectation is, for whether it's a drill shaft or CFA, because really the torque and the horsepower of the machines are, there's a band there, and your expectation is that it comes up to this level. And I think that actually that can help level the field for the contractors too. So everybody's showing up to the party with the same thing.
I was about to add, Martin, that it helps protect you from some Joe Blow subcontractor come in and
coming in with some dangle drill and
as someone said earlier, it helps keep out the riffraff as well.
Yeah.
All right. So turning maybe the mirror onto yourself a little bit, Martin, from again, a former consultant who's now been a contractor for number of years. How do we reverse the stereotype, or how do contractors reverse the stereotype that, in particular, foundation contractors are not an adversary to the owner, that are just looking to get in with the lowest possible bid price and then start hitting change orders to maximize their profit?
I think I can speak for the majority of contractors, subcontractors in this business that, they have some self-respect, and that there's a level of quality, that you want to bring. I personally don't want to be associated with a bad job or a bad hole, or, and it does happen. I mean, we're not perfect. We've made our mistakes, but it's, do you own it? And do you own it early enough? And do you try to correct it? It's really difficult to get inside the brain of, say, some of our competition, that they, is it apathy or ignorance? They don't know and they don't care. So I don't know how any of us can deal with that, or what's the right solution to that. But I think through our respective trade organizations and the communication, we need to float all the boats and raise the level of expectation. So I'm open to do that. I've been active in our industry, and that's if my competitor pours a bad hole, guess what I get? The same black eye. Look at that. There's a crappy shaft. We're not ever going to design a drill shaft. We're never going to put all your gas. And then 6 months, 12 months, maybe 2 years later, amnesia comes in. But everybody, I have suffered. I surely have. And Philadelphia, there's a historically bad shafts poured under the federal courthouse that settled inches, and drill shaft design. And you know what that was? I think it was really just a combination of It was probably poor construction. It was probably, soft bottoms that caused it to settle. And, we're still paying the price. So the bearing capacities and so that I'm kind of rambling on that answer, but it's I learned through working in the industry, it's better to know your competitor, okay, than to curse them and share the knowledge.
I think that's an interesting point about the trade organizations and sharing the knowledge, especially. And Dan, I do want to give you a chance to sort of look at the same question from a designer's perspective. Obviously, as contractors, sometimes we're guilty of coming out onto the site and seeing the representative of the designer, the inspector, and immediately thinking they're our adversary. However, stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason. What is this something that you would if you were talking to a room full of your engineering designer peers, that you would say would be one thing that you could do to reverse that stereotype, that it's not just paper engineering, and that you don't necessarily, you understand that there's not going to be perfection?
Firstly, I would say we have to recognize we have a problem. I would say in design professions, we have a problem because the projects are getting more and more complex, more specialized. There's, 8 gajillion different kinds of ground improvement technologies out there. And instead of trying to just pass off responsibility and put disclaimers in the report and say, and instead of saying in the geotechnical report, well, it could be anything from loose ground to boulders to hard rock to soft soil. And by the way, you can't rely on the borings as a contract document. I mean, that's all nonsense. So I would say to my colleagues that we have to step up and be better and hold ourselves accountable and demand to be engaged throughout the construction. I think this should be part of the codes. I know that ASCE is working on a new code. I mean, it'll be a long time coming, perhaps, but we have to take this seriously about involvement of the design professional through construction, and the design professionals have to take seriously their responsibility to put forth a constructible design that can be built, that doesn't have boo-boos in it. And if you're a little bit out of your comfort zone in understanding what is it going to take, reach out to people. We should have independent third-party reviews of not just for technical correctness, but also for constructability and viability. And is this the best solution, especially when the projects are difficult? There should be, and we should welcome that, not resent it. And lastly, I will say, differing site condition is not your fault. If you did a reasonable program of soil borings or cone penetration or whatever it is, you did a reasonable job and you encounter something that's different than was anticipated, that's what differing site condition clauses were put there to resolve in a straightforward way. It doesn't mean you made a mistake because there's a DSC claim by the contractor. Evaluate that reasonably and responsibly and come to a solution. And when there's a problem, try to work together to get to a root cause of it. Don't go into your silo.
Or your neutral corner.
So, yeah, after I've beaten you to a pulp, Martin, I'm going to say it. Okay, he's not such a bad guy.
It'll be like the MMA fight where the two guys hugged after the end of the
nice,
ballot.
sweaty, bloody hug.
Right. I mean, but that does, and we're going to wrap up here shortly, but say, Martin, we've talked a little bit about what we don't like on one side, but also looking at ourselves, what we could do a little bit better from building a consensus standpoint. Could you elaborate on a little bit of what, from your perspective, what Dan's talked about from are we talking about this, the good site characterization, even if it's separate contracts, the level of communication? At what point do you feel like you need to be brought on board and start having that collaboration with the design engineer to avoid conflicts?
Well, I simply state it, the earlier the better. As a contractor, that's what I seek. Any early involvement in a project, that we get involved and we can help guide. It's the preliminary investigation, go into a final investigation, and then just get what you think. What are your foundation options? So it's building the relationships, building the trust with the design community, and that makes your phone ring to say, hey, what can you do? And just remind everybody that you can reach out to your trade organizations, because that's the ambassador that gives you for public entities to get some input from without getting any I guess, what am I saying? Whatever those clauses are within a contract, they can't, it's got to be
Exculpatory.
Sure. And Dan, looking at it from your perspective, sort of closing that out, to try to bring the foundation contractor in early and develop that level of communication with the design team and the owner, is it, I think I know the answer, but how do you help protect in this new world when a lot of the innovations are coming from the installers during the bid process, ensuring that their best ideas are not going to then be turned around and be shopped around, is as part of the protecting the owner's interests from that standpoint, that you assure that they're going to get rewarded for those?
Yeah. That's certainly above my pay grade, because I've seen that happen.
Yep.
But to try to have a process whereby you can have that level of collaboration, if you can pre-select the contractor on design build, if we've got like a foundation subcontractor as part of the team rather than the low bid guy that the general contractor gets afterwards, then that helps. If it's CMGC, it works nicely. Even on a private job, you can select a subcontractor, and then you can kind of work through some refinements on the design. So, and with respect to like the level of the site investigation, if everybody's on board with how you're going to do quality control, quality assurance, and how you're going to develop an acceptance criteria for installing the foundations, that goes hand in hand with the level of site investigation. So Martin, I recall a project you and I worked together on, and we were debating how many borings to do. And if we did boring at every pier, if we did boring at every column location, well, we could determine more reliably how long this permanent casing was going to be, and how long the cage would have to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, we spend a bunch of money doing borings and you'll have a better idea, or you just come up with a way to be more flexible. So if we can accommodate some uncertainty, the stratigraphy wasn't that bad. Okay, maybe if you just will accept and not get mad at me because the casing had to go 3 feet deeper than was shown on the drawings, then okay, then we can cut out a lot of those borings, because we're doing a exploration at every hole anyway, and we're going to do a verification based on the inspection. So those kind of things, if you work collaboratively, then you can work out a better overall solution.
All right,
totally agree with that. That just having that communication, collaboration, open lines, give and take. What do you think? And and the truth was, if you're hanging 50 tons of steel up in the ground and you're going to King Kong vibrate it down, and we'll just buy an extra 10 feet. Well, no, that's we want to be as it's what's it what's it
What's
worth to you?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, we're right here. Keep going, and that's it.
Excellent. That's the end of round 2. But before we send it back to Lucky for our post-match wrap-up and perhaps determine a winner, I think really we all won here today. It was like a Fat Albert episode. But I want to thank both of you guys, Martin and Dan, for being our inaugural participants in this new podcast. Hopefully our audience got as much out of this as I did listening to it. It's 2 people I have a lot of admiration for, as again, coming from the consulting side with Dan, but also being in the contracting side along with Martin. So again, thank you both for being here and taking the time to educate all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Morgan, I should say both fighters came out swinging. We could not have chosen better speakers for our first Rumble episode, I would say. They both brought their enthusiasm and spirit for sure. Martin was committed and even brought his soil mittens. That's what I want to call it, not the boxing gloves, but soil mittens and a woolen cap into the game. Got a little physical. I could see Martin kind of trying to punch Dan a couple times in the episode. There was no blood spilled, but overall, Martin gave Dan a good fight, I would say. Best thing about Dan and Martin is that they have been in the industry for a very long time, kind of fostering, mentoring the foundation industry, I would say. Also, they have been longtime friends. I'm sure they have been on dark side, better side, at times. So while listening to their, rumble on the topic that we chose, there was a lot of points that actually resonated with me. Their opinions on designers versus contractor working on complex, big design build projects were really valuable to me. And when it comes to conflict, performance, quality versus reality, and specification, they expressed it spectacularly. Bottom line in all of this, I would say, they should mean the same to both, right? If you think about it. And designers and contractors can collaborate and should collaborate, in my opinion as well. Dan and Martin made it very clear that there should be collaboration within different contractors and engineers, and also with the industry a few times during the episode, which was right on. And this is exactly how we can put forth a constructability design for the success of the project. This is definitely word of wisdom, I would say. Sometimes we see this happening on projects, sometimes we don't see this happening, but this is the recipe for success, I would say. The discussion on specification was very, very meaningful for me. Coming from equipment, manufacturing and supplying side, I can see how better to know your competition and also sharing knowledge can work for all involved. Overall, I will say fantastic job, Dan and Martin. Right, Morgan?
I absolutely agree. We probably couldn't have had 2 better guests to start off this new podcast.
Thanks, Morgan, for refereeing. Thanks, Dan. And thanks, Martin, for giving a good fight. Truly enjoyed. This concludes our first episode of DFI Rumble. Listeners, don't forget to comment who won in the arena. Was it designer? Was it contractor or the industry? Looking forward to seeing that. See you next time.
On behalf of DFI, we hope you enjoyed this episode. The views, information, and opinions expressed during Deep Foundation Institute's podcasts are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of DFI. DFI does not verify or take responsibility for the accuracy of the information contained, nor does it warrant that the information contained herein is suitable for any general or specific use. The podcast is available for private, non-commercial use only. Editing, modification, or redistribution of this podcast is prohibited. Thanks for your time. Keep on surviving.